This is the Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. This is episode 44 with Joe Moore. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing wonderful today, Shane. Yourself?
I'm doing great. We just got done with a workout, and now I'm just chilling with my two co-hosts, my dogs, right behind me in our giant love sack in our house. Quite nice. This is my makeshift studio behind me. So,
Good.
yeah, so I want to welcome you to the podcast and start off by shooting out this one standardized question that I have, and that's the only standardized question I have for the whole thing. And that is, the title of the podcast is Conversations with the Mind. And I just want to get a sense from you what that means to you when you hear that phrase, how it resonates with you, how it lands with you, and sort of unpack your thoughts about Conversations with the Mind.
It's a deep name, right? Like there's a lot going on there. In essence, I think what's going on is we're really focused on, making money, eating, whatever we're doing, kind of egocentric stuff. And there's a lot of your mind left. That kind of classic phrase of you're only using I have no idea what the number is. I think it's kind of glib, 5-10% of your mind or your brain not equaling mind is a big deal. There's a lot left. And what happens when we start communicating with the rest of it? I think something really interesting happens, and that's really where our potential is. If we're only at 5-10% of our potential right now, what happens when we get to 50? Amazing things, really. So that's kind of my first pass.
Nice. Could you break down a little bit what your thoughts are, because I definitely agree with you. Should be a distinction in the conversation when we talk about mind. We're not necessarily talking about brain, and there's a lot of different theories about this, and I'd love to hear your take too, because of your background in philosophy, and philosophy of mind is something that we've kind of riffed on before. But this idea, once held that the brain and the mind are one and the same. And now other theories coming out saying that the brain is simply maybe a tuning fork for the mind or for consciousness, and it's just an organ. And we're hearing things from Stan Grof saying that the mind is not even localized within the body itself. That it's it passes through and uses the body as a tool. So what do you think about? I think it's a really interesting thing that needs to be brought up, that distinction.
Right. So we'll start with having we certainly know that the mind is distributed through the body. We have pretty good certainty on that.
Through the body.
Throughout the body. Yeah, distributed throughout your whole body. That, your brain is not your only mind. It's definitely a full body phenomenon, at the very least. And I like the Huxley line. Huxley kind of stole it from somebody. I don't know who it was. It's the brain is kind of a sensory reduction valve, like a mind reduction valve. And when you add psychedelics into the mix, it can often show its true colors. Perhaps you experience the totality of you, or just you get a sense for how big you are. I mean, it sounds kind of glib saying this, but it's, you're a pretty big thing. You're inheriting all of the history of the universe. And if you can hear this and understand a little bit of what we're saying, you own a human brain, which is the most complex thing in the universe that we know of. So that's a pretty amazing deal. What is mind? We have a long way to go on this. That's kind of where I want to put it. Stan Grof's data and all of his LSD psychotherapy research shows that you are not necessarily limited to your biological existence. You have access to and are far more than that. So for instance, in an LSD psychotherapy session or a holotropic breathwork workshop or ayahuasca or whatever, you could have an experience that doesn't necessarily make linear logical sense. So you have to then because it happened, your model's broken. Like if your model doesn't account for something that's happened, then you have to update your model to capture these findings or allow for these things. So that's where, there's all sorts of writers and philosophers on this subject. Like I kind of like the idea of like a family kind of having like a group mind, and like a country, a state, various groups have these things. In the Western magical tradition, you call them an egregore. And there's, group soul, group mind, kind of, spirits that you could theoretically say are the mind of that group. So, and then, mammals and, anything that has shared DNA, planets perhaps have consciousness in mind, who knows? There's a lot, and the subject is huge. We're actually launching a free philosophy class. I don't know if you saw the email a little bit ago. It's going to be with Peter Schwarstad H., who's a philosopher of mind from the UK, and has a very strong interest in psychedelics and where they interact with philosophy. And I'm very excited about that because we're going to definitely dig very deep into philosophy of mind. My general opinion is I don't have a firm position on much
Nice.
other than my lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I like how at first you were describing, you said the brain as being almost like this filtering mechanism for the mind, where, the mind or consciousness is this giant data pool of information, whether it's, information or egos or individual identities or who knows, but that the brain acts as a filter. And we know this through Western psychology too, that we filter out so much more than we actually let through in our daily perception. So for the listeners out there, like in every second of your existence, I think I've read you're taking in about 80,000 bits of information, but your brain can only comprehend or make sense of about 80 bits. So you let go of more than 99% of what you're perceiving in order to make sense of what's going on around you. And what's also happening is your brain is also filling in all sorts of gaps in information that's missing. And so, using it as this idea of a filter makes a lot of sense to me, especially when you talk about psychedelics sort of breaking or widening the filter. If every day we can let in like 80 bits of information and understand it, now psychedelics maybe will allow us to understand 800 bits, maybe just a little bit more, but we're still just barely scratching the surface. I love that idea. And then you're also talking about these group minds, and on every single scale that happens. And, I love blowing it up to the biggest, and just the collective mind of all human beings, transcending borders and transcending genders and races and things like that. We all are a piece or a fractalized version of this one thing, this one entity, this one intelligence, this one data set. And how do we come together and interact with each other on that level too?
Have you seen this book yet? Alien Information Theory?
I have not.
So Andrew Gallimore, DMTX kind of pioneer.
Is that the guy that came to Boulder and spoke? Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that for our audience?
Right. So you and I think that might have been the first time we met in person. Was at this event in Boulder that Daniel McQueen put on, and the opener was Andrew Gallimore, who, it's funny to have him as an opener. He's such a genius. He essentially put together this theory that could possibly account for there being higher dimensional entities and having some sort of real or veridical existence. And I loved it. Like his slides were just so amazing. Like this graphic, it looks really low tech, or like, Nintendo or something, but this particular software was used to model kind of like how life could have just kind of popped up out of nowhere. And you put in like a few small rules into the software, and it looks like life is happening on a 2D scale. So he's got these kind of like images of like an object moving through the 2D grid. And then what happens when you extrapolate that to 3D, and then, five plus dimensions? It's really fascinating. And so a good example would be like a mitochondria. coming up and seeing, like taking a bus ride with us, a flight across the country, none of it would make sense. Like there's too much information there for their sensory apparatus to really work. We have this mind that in a DMT experience can take in a tremendous amount of information, doesn't remember too much. But over time, as you smoke a lot of DMT or perhaps get into this DMTX scenario, you can perhaps become far more conversant in the quote unquote hyperdimensional space. If those things have any kind of reality or have any value, that's still somewhat up for debate. A lot of people think for sure it does. Though, let's not go there. But it's just a really fascinating concept. And what happens when us as humans are then operating at what might be higher dimensional levels? Like, do we become like a new species? What are we at that point? It's a really interesting question. And, we won't really know until we do a bunch of this DMTX work, this extended state DMTX work, where you can be in a DMT experience theoretically for hours or days. And one clarification point, everybody's like, well, that's what ayahuasca is. Like, no, it's a really pharmacologically complex thing. It's 2 plants. It's not just 1 molecule. And I believe the concentration from a DMT blast off is 4 to 8x higher than for an ayahuasca experience. So you really need like a lot more DMT concentration in the blood in order to have a similar thing where you can be there for a while.
Yeah,
so
well, sign me up for sure. And I think that's that's what everybody's, but for sure. I love this idea that you bring up that, through putting ourselves into these altered states of mind or exploring the expansion of the mind, the more frequently we do that and the more frequently we become familiar and create a relationship with this space, that we can actually train our ability to not only navigate the space better, but also bring back more information. So it's like mind training, like being able to train your memory to be able to hold on to more data and bring back more. There's actually, I just listened to a fascinating podcast the other day. It's a brand new podcast called the Mind State Podcast. And then in the 3rd episode, he interviews this guy who has over like 250 individual NN-DMT experiences and feels very familiar with the space. And he talks about it similarly, where over time, like at first you're in shock because this is all brand new information. And like you said, like it disrupts your normal sense of what reality is. And you're like, how do I even make sense of this? But after you gain some familiarity with it, he was able to start actually like having conversations with these other entities in the space, or he was able to interact more with the visualizations and bring back more learning, the more familiar he became with the space. So I think that's the same with anything, with exposure therapies, with training, any sort of behavior pattern or training an athletic skill or any kind of skill like that. The more reps you get, the better you're going to be able to access those skill sets within the mind. And the mind is like it's a training ground. It's a breeding ground for, if we can take the opportunity to really hone and train a lot of these skills. I think Buddhists go about it in the best way. They've explored it for the longest in that way. Then we, like you said, if we can access even 5% more of our brain, like maybe we can achieve like levitation and melting matter and stuff. Just imagine, what 90% or 100% would be like.
So I want to say 2 things. A great analogy too is being born. So you didn't have like sight or taste really. All of a sudden you just like burst onto the world. You die to this being this aquatic creature. And now you're an air breathing, food eating, noise making thing. And there's a lot of information going on out there and you're adapting to it over time. Like, yes, you can hear when you're in the womb, but it's a different kind of hearing because you're no longer like in water, if you want to call it water, but, over the course of 6 months, your vision becomes clear. You can start understanding how to operate your body. And it's a similar analogy that Andrew Gallimore is using in information theory, alien information theory. So it's just a really exciting, fascinating book. Secondly, you're familiar with the Smile Squared, SMI? I think we might have talked about it last time we chatted.
Yeah, we
It's
talked about it on your podcast. Yeah.
Base migration and life extension intelligence squared, something like that. And that, just like what you said, with an extra 5%, we're double as intelligent theoretically, or at least we can operate with that much more information or be more fluid or whatever. There's a lot of intelligence to be unlocked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how did you first gain interest in the mind in general? Like, I know you have an undergrad in philosophy, so it obviously started all the way back then, but were there any like quintessential, huge experiences in your life or anything like that that kind of tipped you in the direction of like, oh, there's something to be explored here? And then, sort of how that developed. Because for me, once that door was opened into, hey, there's this infinite space called the mind that we can explore and have fun in, like it's been opening up ever since for me.
Mm. Yeah, hard, but I think I was definitely a very quiet child, and I don't know exactly why, though I was just really curious. There was this idea that someone, probably my father, said to me at one point, talking about like the owl. He only says one thing. He's only asking questions, never says anything. And then that kind of like snarky line about you were born with two eyes and one mouth. Why are you 2 ears? Like, why are you talking so much? I forget what kind of context that came up in, but it sounded like a bit of wisdom to me at an early age. So I kind of grasped on. I think I got really into, Star Trek and X-Files as a young child. So like the mysteries there were always really fascinating. And there was some stuff about like the nature of mind that would come up pretty regularly. And I think also as a very small child, my folks read to me a lot of J.R.R. Tolkien. So there's a lot of kind of like fantasy built in. Like, where did this shit come from? Like, how did you even do this? It's amazing. I think the jury is still out on how he did it, but I don't think it was just normal literature. So, a lot of that kind of stuff. And yeah, just the mystery of being kind of was a big enough thing for me. I'm like, what is this thing? And how did we get here? What are we doing? Does anybody know what's going on? Who's holding the controls on this spaceship of insanity? And I didn't even really know it was insane until really college. I got to school and 9/11 happened. And immediately I'm like, oh, better join the army because they're coming after us. Thankfully, I didn't join the army. I was able to stay in school and, later kind of understood better the military industrial complex and how manipulated the population is by those in power. And that's a big aspect to nature of mind. Yes, sometimes there's things that need to be done, but I think often it's what's happening at the larger scale is just serving big interests, not the people, not you as an individual, for sure. I don't know. Sidetrack.
Yeah. What do you think about, oh, sorry.
My audio cut out. Are you back?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, cool. My audio cut out for a sec. But Memorial Day just happened, and the U.S. Army put out on Twitter, how has serving impacted you in your life? And like all the veterans started coming out about all this PTSD stuff. And, now I'm, can't even be around fireworks, can't spend time with my children, blah, blah, blah. I'm doing a lot more work with veterans now. Been partly inspired by you. It's really amazing. But, there's something you learn by talking to veterans of these more recent wars. And you can learn about the nature of mind there too. Like the human mind, the physical lower levels of it aren't that hard to understand and manipulate. There's a book called Battle for the Mind, or Battle for the Mind, which kind of is a historical review of mind control and manipulation through the ages. Very, probably a little too academic, but still very interesting. But there's a lot going on. I was always interested in conspiracy too. Like the X-Files is pretty big on that. And if there's a conspiracy, what's actually happening is you're kind of tricking people. So conspiracy can just be three people in a room and two people kind of trying to sell the other person something. All it takes is two business people agreeing to work on something, and then you have a conspiracy. It's kind of an old Chomsky line. So conspiracy could be at any scale, and it does say something interesting about the mind. So there's a lot. Like, I don't have a firm opinion on too many things. I've never had a firm conclusion on 9/11. I wish I had one. I wish I had one on all sorts of things, but I don't.
Yeah, you brought up one of those existential questions that you were faced with early on, and you said, some of the big ones that we all, I think, or hope that we all think about, like, why am I here, and what are we all doing? But one of them in particular stood out to me when you were listing those off, and that was, who's pulling the strings on this thing? Who has the hands on the controls of this spaceship? And I've thought, I've had since my teen years sort of a feeling about that, right? Like, I never knew who is in charge, but it was more felt since before I got into psychedelic assisted work and stuff like that, and then was shown a little bit more, opened up a little bit more to what could be going on. But what I kept being shown was that when that question would come up, who's pulling the strings? Nobody's really pulling the strings, and we're all pulling the strings at the same time. And I kept getting the message like, oh, well, if that's the case, then I'm pulling some of these strings. I'm a string puller just like everyone else is. And so I was kind of shown like I have more agency over my life and my existence and what I want to happen in my past, present, and future. And that I have some control over that, some agency, as long as I'm willing to accept the responsibility and the consequences too. But that's not to say that, I'm the ultimate string puller, or that I am the one God. But, I think Tim Leary, as well as other people in those circles, have said, you are a God, you are God. We are all God, and so we all have like this agency over creating reality as it's happening. You know what I mean? I love that question.
You're only screwing up when you think you're the only one. Tim Leary was good friends with Robert Anton Wilson, and they chatted at length about all this stuff. Robert Anton Wilson was super interested in conspiracy too. And, he was very comical and kind of snarky about it. And I loved his approach, really helped me tremendously. One of his lines, though, is, thinking that there's somebody in control, that there is an Illuminati that's really in control of what's happening, it's a loser script. The real winner script that you can pull up is that you and your friends are the real Illuminati, the real change makers, and the real influencers. But you have to become that. You have to figure out how to embody that. It takes a lot of reading, a lot of inner work, a lot of, inquiry. And you can do that. And there's a lot that's worth doing. There's a real lot that's worth doing. And if you're convinced yourself that you are the change makers, you and your group, it's pretty awesome. It's way more empowering, way more of like a quote unquote winner script.
Sure. I'm sure that's a little bit of what you're feeling right now with Psychedelics today, and really stepping into what you do with that venture, and feeling like, you're finally getting to do exactly what you're meant to do. Can you speak a little bit and tell the audience a little bit about what you do with Psychedelics today?
Right. So we're an education and media company, mainly trying to get psychedelic enthusiasts, therapists, and clinicians ready for the next wave of the psychedelic revolution, which is coming. The tsunami has not yet broken into a wave we can surf, but it is coming. And we want to help people get ready. So we've been around for about 3 years, and a little over 3 years now, 140, 150 podcast episodes. We've interviewed all sorts of people, largely doctors, clinicians, folks like you. I think you got the title of being on the show the most, which is really cool. And we have developed a really great online education platform. Anybody from a college, high school kid to a doctor could benefit from taking our classes. We're actually about to on Friday, teach our first course ever for doctors directly. So it's going to be a doctors only class. We're a few weeks into our clinician course, which is nurses, therapists, etc. That's going to be really great. And a general audience. We've taught a lot of general folks. So people with depression or whatever, they just want to know more about what their options are out there, because SSRIs aren't cutting it. Or, ketamine only helped them for a couple months and they needed something that was next. So there's a lot of options there. And, we really started the project because we saw that holotropic breathwork, Stan Grof's holotropic breathwork, was not given an appropriate position in the psychedelic discussion. It had been my main tool for years and years. And Kyle's as well, my business partner, with the co-founder there as well. He, got a tremendous amount of help from breathwork. And to me, some of my most intense experiences, psychedelic experiences, were with breathwork. And I said, okay, this really needs to be part of the conversation. It's about psychedelic origins. It makes psychedelic experiences happen. There's something there. And that was kind of our main pulse. And then we just kind of like felt our way through it. And here we are, kind of, it's become a thing of its own.
Dude, I love, I think you have, you've carved your own little niche in with psychedelics today that I think is going to unfold in ways that you have no idea. And what came to my mind when you were speaking about psychedelics today, I forget what you said, but it triggered this thing in my head that I'd heard recently, maybe in the last couple of months. Someone just came right out and said that life itself, everyday sober life experience, is the biggest psychedelic trip of all, right? Like, this is so insane that we are alive, that we exist, that I can talk to you through a computer, that I can see colors out. Like, this is an insane psychedelic mind manifesting trip that we're all on anyway. We're all on this psychedelic trip. It's just that some of us are exploring it a little bit with a little bit more vigor than others. Others are just kind of settling into the psychedelic trip. Some are settling in more comfortably than others, and some are struggling against the reality of just everyday life. So I think with, especially with things becoming decriminalized now, and I'd love to hear what you think is going to come of Decriminalize Denver and the psilocybin initiative. That was huge. But yeah, with this wave coming, this new renaissance coming in our lifetime, these things will be legal. These things will be destigmatized. These things will be starting to, we'll start to explore them. And, that new research center out at the London Imperial College on consciousness research and psychedelics, I think that's what I want to be in. That's the very crest of the wave, is exploring what is consciousness itself through the use of these tools. So,
right.
Yeah. What do you think about life as a psychedelic experience itself?
Right. Like, okay, so psychedelics are super interesting, right? It can be, you've been working a gas pump for 10, 12 years, and then all of a sudden you find LSD and you're like, oh my God, this is the most miraculous thing that's ever happened to me. And then all of a sudden you get wrapped up in that and, lose your job pumping gas, and who knows, got to move back in with your family or something. There's psychedelics can destabilize. I think the point of psychedelics is not to like maximize the regularity at which you can ingest them. I think it's to live. Like, you get this one shot, theoretically, to live. And let's really use these things as tools to live more fully. A life well lived is like one of the biggest things, the most valuable things you can really, really do. There's arguments to be made against that, but I think there's something there. And yeah, man, just looking around, like watching, take a small hit of weed and watch some David Attenborough deep, like the ocean floor, like Mariana Trench stuff. Holy shit. The fact that that stuff exists on this planet is unreal. The amount of diversity of life, how ecosystems work, amazing. If you look at like a permaculture education, if you do one of those 14-day permaculture design cert courses, that will change your worldview into seeing that everything is related, seeing that systems don't stop, everything's a process. It is one of the most psychedelic education tools, and there's no drugs at most psychedelic, permaculture design courses. So, I think, yeah, life on Earth, life in the universe is, we don't have to go really beyond 3D plus time, or 4D, if you want to call it that. Like, you don't, to see the psychedelic stuff, it's right here. Like, watch water boil, see how complex the interactions are. There's a lot, like, it's pretty incredible. It is a miraculous existence. And you don't need to be high to see it, though it might remind you that everything is psychedelic downstream. Like, okay, whoa, look at how amazing this is. Or look at the design on this flower. Or, I'm going to Hawaii real soon. I noticed that Canada geese got there somehow. And now there's like a different variety of Canada goose that looks like very different. They adapted, and like the fur pattern is super beautiful. And like, just the fact that, evolution likely happens and it works differently than we understand at this point in history. Both of those two things are amazing. And the fact that science is young, like, yes, there's laws for space-time. I don't think we fully understand those yet. Like, we understand them as far as we do, which is decent. But there's more.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the decriminalize effort in Denver is really going to make a huge impact on. People are all up in arms and kind of worried about, what does it mean for the kids, and what are the kids are going to think, and like all these things are going to happen, and we're going to have people tripping down on 16th Street Mall and stuff. I only hold good hope, and I think that with the decriminalizing piece. Yeah, we might see an initial spike in use just in celebration, but it's going to peter off just like we saw with the cannabis industry. And my hope is that, even with a microdose of these non-toxic mushrooms, people can finally start to experience some of the beauty that you and I are talking about, seeing beauty in everyday little things. Take a microdose of mushrooms and watch water boil, or watch grass grow. Like, it's insane. Get down on the ground and put your face in the dirt and see what's really going on there. There's a whole world down there, if you just pay attention. And some of these medicines, some of these compounds can help open that door, so that you don't need the drug afterwards. Once you've experienced it once, you're like, okay, I know that exists, and I can go appreciate it at just the same level. But what do you think the decriminalize effort's how it's gonna unfold, and what is that gonna mean for us, especially living here in Colorado?
Huge things. I don't know if you saw the headline today, but there was a bill decriminalizing possession of 4 grams and less.
Yeah, defelonizing. Yeah, that was Jared Polis. That was awesome. And I want to know your opinion too, because I think that's fantastic, being a licensed addiction counselor myself, and seeing the stigma and the struggle that people who get felonies for small amounts of drugs have to carry this felony with them for the rest of their life. It impacts their ability to get work, and oftentimes makes people give up and just go straight into the drug life anyway, when, minor possession. So that the interesting thing is 4 grams. Okay. So 4 grams of most drugs, not that big of a deal, but what about 4 grams of LSD, right? That's a lot.
Didn't even consider that.
That is a lot of LSD. And I don't, again,
you're going to federal penitentiary at that point.
Yeah. Well, the policymakers, I don't know if they considered that, or if there's anybody just wise to that.
On the darker side. So let's talk decrim first.
Yes.
So I believe that there's going to be a huge uptick in the black/gray market for underground facilitators with psilocybin. I think the majority of the media has gotten it wrong. Everybody thinks it's legal now. Now that mushrooms are legal, what are you going to do? Well, they're not, man. Education is going to have to be a big deal. Like, we're going to have to keep educating folks. I plan on doing more education in person in Denver to help reduce harm, because there will be some hospitalizations from this for sure. Though, we have historical precedents for decriminalization being pretty good. Portugal, Switzerland for one. Amsterdam, if you look at when Netherlands kind of changed their pot laws a little bit, people started smoking less weed. Same thing here. Like less kids are smoking weed. So you probably see less kids in Denver eating mushrooms at a certain point. Like it's not as edgy. It's not as illegal. So you're probably going to see some stuff there. So those are the two biggest things. I think we're also going to see a flap of physicians prescribing psilocybin through that federal Right to Try Act. Plus, this makes Denver physicians feel safer trying that out. And I think it's going to be a strengthened psychedelic culture in Denver, like the Psychedelic Club. I was recently granted a seat on the Psychedelic Club National Board. So I'm now
Congratulations.
thank you, board of directors member. It's my first ever board of directors position. So hopefully I can live up to that. So I think we're going to see, and they're based in Denver, I think we're going to see them have more energy because they played a huge part in this project. I think we're going to see more and more empowerment of grassroots organizers, and we'll see, perhaps decriminalization of ayahuasca next in city limits, which would be amazing.
You know what I would love to see, just to kind of shine a light back on Colorado, but in a positive way. We've heard a lot and we've read a lot about microdosing culture in Silicon Valley and microdosing and its roles in, and large experiences and its roles in solving big complex problems throughout history. The iPod was thought of during an LSD trip, that sort of thing. I would love to see, now that these efforts are really taking shape here in our home state, if all of a sudden we had like this huge boom in the next 5 years of like technological expansion and problem solving and Nobel Prize winners and things like that coming out of a psychedelically informed culture here in Colorado. I think that if we can hold it together and keep people educated and show people the right way to go about this, then we can really lead the charge and show people what the potential is. That we have this small little bubble, psychedelic bubble that's forming right here, and other states are going to form their own bubbles too, and people are going to start to see innovation and amazing things come out of this whole venture.
I think you're onto something. I'm negligent because that's typically the thing I say is more interesting than therapy, is creativity and creative problem solving, and that really is where the rubber meets the road. We're theoretically down to the wire around extinction and climate, and we need all the creativity we can get. So yes, I would love to see that, and I think there is a huge option there. Like if individuals are only going to get a small fine or whatever the penalty is, then I think the incentive is much higher than elsewhere. But I think people need to be educated on this. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll just go down to Denver and run some creativity for psychedelic workshops and see what happens. I think there's something there. And the more people understand that, I think you're right. Like I would almost hate to see it, but Denver could become, as high rent as San Francisco if we play our cards wrong or right. So yeah, but a thing I like is this, one of the pluses the United States has over a lot of other countries is that we have huge diversity in our politics and laws by state and city, and states can kind of compete to see what laws work best. And if you want to stay as broke as, I don't know, for instance, New Mexico, you do, or Alabama, you do what Alabama does, and make little girls, go to prison for life or something. There's a lot there, and having states have to compete, I think, is really cool because states have to stay ahead of each other to get more people there. Colorado's getting a lot of people, and there's a lot of brain drain elsewhere. So what are other states going to have to do to kind of maintain their population? Otherwise, their constituency is not going to be happy about the decline in, I don't know, GDP of the states. It's an interesting competitive scenario, and I think there's going to be some traction as a result of that. And thanks for bringing that up around creativity. I think you're right.
Yeah, and then what are your thoughts on the defelonizing of all substances and this is statewide, right? This is not just Denver. This is statewide.
Right, statewide, which is a big deal. I think Mitch Gomez at Dance Safe played a big part in this. He also helped get test kits to be not declared as paraphernalia, so it's less penalty for carrying around a test kit, though there's been no real charges on that statewide, I don't think. But yes, one of the biggest moves we can do to reduce the harm around drugs is decriminalizing, if not totally legalizing. Because if you don't know what you're, as we cut access for good drugs, people just buy worse drugs, like crocodile in Russia and fentanyl. It's like because heroin's harder to get, your dealers are more incentivized to, how much value can you squeeze into a brick? And fentanyl's way more profitable than a brick of heroin. So, bring on the harder drugs and the scarier drugs. And as we legalize and take the stigma out and decriminalize, we make it more possible to do better harm reduction services. So, always back for me, switch to Switzerland and Portugal, where Switzerland pretty much has, and Portugal, 0 heroin ODs every year. No bloodborne infections from sharing needles. I think the rate's just way lower than it was before. Like HIV is super low in those countries now. And they had extraordinarily high HIV rates and OD rates before. Worse. I believe their heroin epidemics were worse than what we're dealing with here in terms of our whole opioid epidemic. And they were able to totally sort it out through compassion over enforcement.
Yeah, so what I've read too, being in the substance abuse field, not only did they legalize all drugs, but instead of punishing, like now if you get busted with drugs, I think unless it's for mass distribution or something, that's still illegal. But if you get busted with any sort of personal drug use, there's no penalty. You don't go in front of a judge. You don't go to jail. You don't even get arrested. You go in front of like a treatment board of people, of professionals, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and they help you put together a plan for rehabilitation. So instead of going on a punitive model, it's a rehabilitative, compassionate model. And not only do they help these people, and the country pays for them to go get the treatment that they need, but they also help set them up in the transition period back to society. So they will get these people jobs to help reestablish meaning and purpose in their life. They will help with social connections and connectivity, the whole Rat Park stuff, connecting people back to the community so that they're not stigmatized for being drug addicts, and making it, like a normalized thing. I'm not sure if they have safe injection sites over there, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a component. Yeah, so that's an important component too. And I see a lot on social media these days, there's some efforts in different countries and different states to put up safe injection sites. I think the bill in Denver just got shot down for that. But people who are opposed don't really look into or take the time to look into the real research behind it. Safe injection sites are super good for the community. And people, I think, are afraid that, now you're just going to give people an excuse and a place to go use and avoid life. Well, they're going to be doing that anyway. But this is giving them a safe place, a clean place to do it with medical professionals around. I think safe injection sites cut down on overdose deaths by almost 100% because they have the Narcan on hand. They have the defibrillators on hand. They have clean needles on hand. And these things are really good to keep it contained, and then also when people go in there and they really hit rock bottom, they also have facilitators there that can help connect people directly to treatment when they need it. Because what I find in my field is that, I deal with a lot of opiate addicted folks who come in and get medication assisted therapy with Suboxone or Subutex or some other medicine. And oftentimes they say, I'm so happy that I found you guys, because no one told me where to go to get help for these things. No one showed me that there was other options other than a cold detox or a hard detox off of my opiates. I had no idea there were options, and I'm so glad I found you guys. And I feel like probably only 2% of the addicts out there who want to get clean know where to go to get help. And the other 98% are left on their own, just trying to figure it out. And that's probably why we have such a high relapse rate. Helping people connect to treatment rather than to jails, which help perpetuate the problem in the first place and fuel not only the, you're talking about the military industrial complex. So I liken that a lot to the prison complex and private prison systems for profit and modern day slavery, and putting these people behind bars for a couple joints. In some parts of the country, you can still go to prison for a long time for a couple joints, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, man. Some people aren't ready for treatment. You just have to have it ready for when they are. And I had this crazy conversation with one of my oldest friends, and he was just going off on the fentanyl crisis and where he lives. And the degree to which he was not compassionate killed me. And it was because of the media he had been listening to and the people he had been talking to. It's like, no, just let him die. Like, don't let the EMTs go there because they're just gonna have to go again tomorrow. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're my friend and this is how you're talking? And I had to say, okay, let's pump the brakes, Joe. Don't freak out. Just kind of like be compassionate, because he doesn't know, and give him the education he needs to, be a little bit more compassionate around this. Even if you want to just look at it as a pure numbers game, with $30,000 to $50,000 to dispatch an ambulance to pick up a dead body, Narcan, $100. Like, why aren't we giving out Narcan everywhere? Like, the numbers make a lot of sense.
At my clinic, we literally have like 500 boxes of Narcan, and we hand it out to every single person for free. So if you're in the Fort Collins area or the Northern Colorado area and you need Narcan to help prevent overdose from opiates, come to us. We can give it to you for free.
Outstanding. And I was visiting Vancouver a couple years back in British Columbia. They have one of the worst opiate epidemics, people dying constantly. They actually had free Narcan all over the place, which is really neat. It's, it's so cheap to save a life. You still have to get the ambulance there probably, because Narcan only acts for a short period of time, but it's still a big deal, and it does save their lives. Addiction's a complicated thing, as you well know. One of my favorite books, I hate to talk about this book because the guy kind of got himself in trouble, but Chasing the Scream. Did you read that one? I think the guy got in trouble for plagiarism or something, but the book is still incredible, and does a really good job taking a compassionate look at addiction and reframes a lot of this stuff for us. And it goes into the kind of racist, gross origins of the drug war and addiction. And it's a very helpful book if you want to dig into addiction more. Drug use isn't necessarily bad, right? Like, there's ways to use drugs. Like, there's heroin addicts that hold down normal careers and their family never finds out. Heroin's actually pretty safe if used appropriately. Fentanyl, if you got every thing clean, and maybe you're rich enough to pay a nurse to do it for you, like that'd be cool. But there's people in Switzerland who have been lifelong addicts and nobody knows, and the government helps them through that, and they're able to hold down a normal career and life and family and everything.
Yeah. So on sort of spinning off of what you do with Psychedelics Today too, and the education piece, but also talking about functional drug users. I don't know. Have you ever seen the show House?
Yeah.
The doctor, the diagnostician. So Callie and I, my wife and I, that's our new show, and we're watching it from start to finish. And in season 1, there's a couple interesting episodes. One of the episodes, House takes LSD. First, he injects himself with, I think it was nitroglycerin to induce a migraine headache. And then to come out of the migraine, once he proved this guy's theory wrong, he took LSD. to help him with his headaches and his cluster headaches. And so in this light, they were showing it sort of playfully, but very skillfully. I thought they were playing off of some of the fears of some of the other doctors around the substance, but also House's perception of like, this is no big deal, guys. Like this is no big deal. It's curing my headaches. It's very healing. And then just last night we watched the final episode of season 1, and you have to go watch this. So this is I'm not going to give away the whole thing, but House has some issue that requires him to get ketamine anesthesia. And he has this whole ketamine experience, going in the K-hole and coming up with answers to problems he's trying to solve, diagnostic problems he's trying to solve. So he ends up like saving people's lives and like healing himself at the same time with these ketamine experiences. And the whole episode is just one big ketamine trip. And then at the end, like the last scene before the season is over, it's like a rewind all the way back to like right before the surgery. And he's like, tell him I want ketamine. And then it rewinds. And it's really interesting because in season 2, it unfolds in the first couple episodes, like some of the benefits that he got from the ketamine treatment, including completely coming out of a chronic pain issue. He was going from limping on a cane to running 5 to 7 miles a day and like working out, overcoming depression, overcoming all sorts of mental health issues for a number of months after his ketamine treatment. So it was fairly accurate to some of the scientific results we've been seeing. So I love that they probably got somebody knowledgeable to consult on that, but that's something you got to see. I think it's a good way. It's good to see that modern mass media like that is properly educating people on some of these substances, and also addressing some of the fears in a very creative way, but also in the end showing that this is very beneficial and something useful.
I saw a episode of this show Homeland years ago where they did an Ibogaine session. It was horrifying in like a CIA holding cell. So it was not ideal conditions, but holy shit, they did a great job painting that picture. That could be a good project, collecting psychedelic references in pop culture. Yeah.
No, that'd be excellent.
My girlfriend's watching House right now, so I like watch it. I look, not currently, but I often look over and go, "What? He is such an asshole." But he's like, they paint him poorly because that works for the story or whatever. But it's always interesting stuff, and it's just drugs, right? Like drugs are just drugs, and some people just love booze, which is proven to be the most dangerous drug. Was that third biggest killer of humans behind like cancer, heart disease is like drinking, I think.
Well, sugar, one of the worst drugs out there, man.
That's probably the cancer one.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I know you got to get going, but Joe, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope to have you on the show again. You bring such a unique and amazing lens on the mind and consciousness, and all your experiences and all the people you've talked to and all the great work that you're doing. I want to thank you for all that. And man, it's been great. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dane. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been really fun. And anytime you want me back on, I'm game.
All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. Bye. Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.